The Secure Truck Radio by Vadim Osipov. Vadim Osipov speaking. Now education. The Open Window. After H. Munro. My aunt will come down in a few minutes, Mr. Nuttall, said a girl of 15, showing him into the sitting room. Mr. Nuttall was a young painter who had recently had a nervous breakdown. The doctors had told him that he should go away for a holiday. They warned him, however, against crowded resorts and recommended a complete rest in a quiet country place. So here he was in a little village with letters of introduction from his sister to some of the people she knew. Some of the people there are quite nice, his sister had said to him. I advise you to call on Mrs. Shackleton as soon as you arrive. I owe the wonderful holiday I had to her. Do you know many of the people round here? Asked the girl when they were sitting comfortably on the sofa. No, I'm afraid I don't, answered Mr. Nuttall. I've never been here before. My sister stayed here 4 years ago. You know, she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here. Then you know nothing about my aunt, do you? Asked the girl. Only her name and address, said the visitor. Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago, said the child. Her tragedy? Asked Mr. Nuttall. You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on October afternoon, went on the girl, pointing to a large French window. It's quite warm for this time of year, said Mr. Nuttall. But has that window anything to do with the tragedy? Exactly 3 years ago, my aunt's husband and her 2 young brothers walked out through that window. They went shooting and never came back. When they were crossing the river, their boat probably turned over, and they were all drowned. Their bodies were never found. That was the most horrible part of the tragedy. Here the girl stopped. There were tears in her eyes, and she drew a handkerchief out of her pocket. 3 years has passed, but my poor aunt still thinks that they will come back soon, some day. They and the little brown dog that were drowned with them had walked in through that window just as they always did. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it's quite dark. Poor dear aunt, she can't understand that they've left forever. She's growing worse day by day, so let me give you some advice. Don't be surprised at anything she says or does. She will start telling you all over again how they went out, her husband put his coat over his arm, and her youngest brother singing, Bertie, why don't you come? As she once told me. You know, sometimes on quiet evening like this, I almost get a feeling that they will all walk in through that window, and the whole family will be gathered in here again. The young girl finished her sad story. There was a little pause, and Mr. Nuttall was glad when Mrs. Shackleton at last entered the room. I'm sorry I'm late, she said, but I hope my niece has entertained you well. Yes, she's been very amusing, said Mr. Nuttall. Do you mind that open window? Asked Mrs. Shackleton. My husband and brothers will soon be home from something. They always come into the house this way. And she went on speaking gaily about shooting. After what Mr. Nuttall had just heard, he looked worried. The doctors told me, he said, trying to change the subject, to have a rest here to avoid anything that would make me feel nervous." "Did they?" said Mrs. Shackleton in a voice which showed that she was not at all interested in what Mr. Nuttall was saying. She never took her eyes off the open window and suddenly cried out, "Here there at last! Just in time for tea! How tired they look!" Mr. Nuttall looked at the girl and saw that she was looking out through the open window with horror in her eyes. Mr. Nuttall turned round slowly in his seat, looked in the same direction, and saw their figures walking across the garden towards the window. They all carried guns, and one of them had a coat over his shoulder. A tired brown dog was following them. Noiselessly they approached the house, and then a young voice began to sing, "Bertie, why don't you come?" Mr. Nuttall seized his hat and ran out of the house like mad. "Here we are, my dear," said Mrs. Shackleton's husband, coming through the window. "We have enjoyed ourselves very much. I wonder what made that gentleman run out so quickly when we came up. Who is he?" "A very strange young man," called Nuttall. "He could only talk about his illness. He didn't say a single interesting thing. I don't understand why he ran out that way without saying goodbye," said his wife. "I think it was the dog," said the niece calmly. "He told me that he was afraid of dogs. Once he was attacked by a pack of dogs somewhere in India. He was so frightened that he started running like mad, and finding himself in a cemetery, climbed down into a newly dug grave. They had to spend the night. Since then he was always been afraid of dogs." Since she was very good at inventing stories and did it artistically. Okay, I'll reread it next time. There were some drawbacks, of course. Oh yeah.
That he should go away for a holiday. They warned him, however, against crowded resorts and recommended a complete rest in. Okay, this is my rave. This is what he or she was thinking. Lesson 22. Now I read a story by Munro. It's named The Open Window, a very interesting story, so listen tea, and we'll discuss it a bit. My aunt will come down in 2 minutes, Mr. Nuttall, said a girl operative, showing him into the sitting room. Mr. Nuttall was a young painter who had recently had a nervous breakdown. The doctor had told him that he should go away for a holiday. They warned him, however, against crowded resorts and recommended a complete rest